You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our super generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by, that's right, every Wookiee's favorite right-hand man. We're Han Solo today, but no fear. We've got a lot of great news and information coming your way over the next half hour, so buckle up and get a drink or get a snack and hang out with us for a bit. First, as we always do, and we're Han Solo, let's chat about what we've got coming up on Talking Headways in the next few weeks. So first off, actually, I want to go back in time. It was great to have Tracy on last week. Really appreciate her coming on, and we'll hopefully get Chrissy on in a couple of weeks, maybe after Memorial Day, and looking forward to that. Having both of them come back on is really a breath of fresh air for me, because I really enjoy having folks to bounce ideas off of and push back or push forward or whatever you want to do. But it's great to have those two coming back, and thanks Tracy for coming on last week. Hopefully we can get her on more often, as she's a little bit more free these days to do that. Not free generally, I'm sure, but free to get on the show from time to time. So we appreciate that. So yeah, coming up on Talking Headways. So this last week we had Megan Kimball on to talk about her book, City Limits. We also talked about some of her research at the Eisenhower Library in Manhattan. Not Kansas. Not Manhattan. It was Abilene, Kansas. I heard Abilene and I was like, Abilene, Texas, Manhattan, Kansas, Manhattan, New York. But it was super interesting stuff about how the president didn't really want state DOTs running highways through the center of cities. And what happened is that he, commissioned a study from one of his friends from school, and who was also a general, and he came up with this plan for more mass transit and better ways to figure out cities and not spending all the highway money on going through cities, and because it went over budget by a lot. But he just didn't want to do it because it was an election year and it was Nixon versus Kennedy, and I just found that really interesting, that little footnote in history where we could have avoided a lot of mess if Eisenhower kind of had stood up a little bit there, and Nixon lost anyways, so it's not like anything would have changed necessarily. He might have gotten beaten worse, I don't know, but interesting footnote to history about that. And so this week we have, so go back and listen to that episode too. There's a lot more details in there than I could share here and remember to the detail, but yeah, check that out if you get a chance. This week, Jarrett Walker joins the show for a second time. Our first discussion was really great. We talked about NIMBYs and a bunch of other stuff, not necessarily his book, but this time we do talk about the book, and I'm really excited to have you all listen to Jarrett and his ideas and how they've evolved maybe over the last 10 years or so. After he wrote Human Transit the first time, and then what he thought about for the second edition release. So there's a lot of changes in there, and really, really exciting. We've also got a lot of book guests coming up. We've got Wes Marshall talking about his book, Killed by a Traffic Engineer. We've got Anna Zievarts coming up. Kevin Kelly, Michael Batty is coming to talk about his book, The Computable City. I'm really excited about that. Nico Larco also will join us to talk about his awesome new release, The Sustainable Urban Design Handbook. So we've got a stack of books. I've got more than I can chew at the moment, and I think I might have overscheduled a few so that I might have to read some books back to back to back. I try not to, as it's a lot of work to read books and have the shows, but I really enjoy having, learning all that stuff and then also talking with the authors. So that's really great too. And if you want to go to if you want to support us for going and reading all the books and sharing all the information with you all, definitely support the authors as well by going to our bookshop site, bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire, and you can buy any of the books from the authors that we've had on the show. There's a couple that are missing, but for the most part, most people are in there. We've also got 2 MPAC shows already out that we'll share as well here on the Talking Headways feed, but you can go and listen to them now on the MPAC podcast if you want a head start. Tracy Haddon-Lowe of the Brookings and Aaron Clark of the Denver Housing Authority came on the show, and we'll post those here on the feed, but you can go listen to those early over there. Usually they come out about a month ahead of time. So those come up about a month before I post them on Talking Headways. So you can get those early if you want to check out the Impact podcast and get that wherever you get your podcast, as always. I'm also trying to get to a few other subject topics as well. I'm hoping to talk with folks about Brightline versus Amtrak in the Northeast Ohio area. And like I said before, book talks are fun, but I love learning. And I love learning so much about what people are writing about. And obviously they put a lot of heart and soul into it, but it also is a lot of memory work for my brain. So we're trying to get some other topics as well that might be on research reports or other topics. Maybe, I think Smart Growth America, we're going to do something around dangerous by design, the report that they usually do. So lots of other stuff cooking as well. Oh, also, before I forget, Anna Zivarts and her book, Driving is Not an Option, which we mentioned earlier, we're probably going to do a live recording for that one at Spur here in San Francisco. And I think it's on June 3rd. I'll get you more information on the next Monday show, whenever that might be, probably in 2 weeks. But we look forward to seeing folks there for that live show. It's going to be really exciting and fun. And Anna's going to be in town, so we're going to have a chat with her, and it's going to be at Spur, and I'm not sure quite the format yet. We might be a panel discussion with me moderating, or it might be a question and answer with me and a couple of other folks, including Anna. So definitely come and check that out and say hi if you get a chance. And as always, we're still dreaming up some live events and happy hours and things like that. So as always, listen to this space like just now where I mentioned the Spur event, but for when that stuff becomes available, because we're going to do more of it this year. We've already started out real well at the end of last year and the beginning of this year with some happy hours and some live shows and stuff like that. So really happy to have folks come and join us at those, and they've been great successes. So we're happy to do that and meet everybody that comes out and say hi and all that stuff. Super fun. Also, we're coming up on 500 episodes on Talking Headways, and that's a lot of shows. Probably sometime in July, I'm guessing, will be the 500th episode. I think it should be a big one, right? We should go big. What do you all think? Should we try to get a big guest? I guess I should start trying to book that now. We're 2 months out. Maybe try to throw a live show party or something along those lines. I don't know, but shoot me an email and let me know if you have any ideas for like going big on a 500th episode. I mean, that's a lot of episodes. Also, I'm just really super, super happy that we've made it this far, because I know that, for the majority, I think it's like 90% of podcasts end after 7 episodes or something. And we've been on for 500. So we're not there yet, obviously, earth and nature willing, but, we keep on trucking, and I'm so happy that you all keep listening to the show. And it's, basically, that's the reason why we keep on doing it, is because folks still listening and folks are still interested. And I still have lots of topics that I want to talk about. I will say that folks have been asking me lately, like what I want to do in the podcast space, coming up, and maybe for the next 500 episodes, I don't know, but it's getting harder to do topics because we've done so many topics. 500 episodes is a lot of episodes, and there's a lot of talking, a lot of information. And so I try to find stuff that's interesting, find stuff that's new and novel and interesting. And hopefully you guys kind of get that out of the podcast as well. If you listen to the Talking Headways show, some people like to listen to Mondays only, and some people like to listen to Talking Headways, and some people like to listen to both. So hopefully that one at 500 will be something that everybody wants to listen to. Hopefully we can put something together that's good. But if you have any ideas, let me know. theoverheadwire@gmail.com. Send me a note. I'm still trying to think about that one and what that entails. Yeah. And so, thanks to everybody who's been ordering the Bus and Bike scarves. You guys are awesome. As we have been saying since the beginning of the year, for Monday's show listeners, we'll give you 25% discount on 5 or more scarves if you want to order. Email me at theoverheadwire@gmail.com and we'll get that set up. We really appreciate everybody who wants to support the show, and folks that are Patreons. We really, really super appreciate you coming together, each month and supporting the show. Really, we wouldn't be going without you. There's other ways to support the show too. We've got the scarves, we've got the bookshop site, we've got the Cars Are Cholesterol t-shirts and merch. You can also subscribe to our newsletter as well. The basic newsletter is only 4 articles a day, little tiny thing with an intro. You can also subscribe to the main one too, which is how I mostly am able to pull this all off, because it's a subscription newsletter and folks pay for that. So also, listening to ads before the show and after the show are super helpful too. And there's many other ways to support the show as well. And so listening is one of those that really helps us out too. So thanks so much for everybody who listens and supports the show in any way you do that. That's awesome. Again, don't forget to order any of the books that we've covered on the show on our bookshop site. I always mess that up. My words don't come out when I say bookshop. Bookshop.org/shop/the overhead wire. Cars Are Cholesterol merch at bit.ly/Cars Are Cholesterol. Check it out. Richard Brzezinski did a great design. Check out his Instagram at Dick David Sketches for more of his amazing drawings. And also, we're at 152 episodes on Monday's show. We just did it. We just passed 150 here. So 500 plus 160 shows here. That's going to be 620 something shows that we've done, or 650 shows by the time we get to July, maybe. So, oh my gosh, that's so many. And we're happy to be here and live and in session, and looking forward to having Chrissy back in a couple of weeks after Memorial Day sometime. And then Tracy will get her back on soon. And hopefully we'll get some more guests too. Just depends sometimes on my crazy schedule, whether I can make it work or not. Sometimes these Monday shows where I'm Han Solo, they actually work better if I'm Han Solo, because I can process them and get them out and get them going. And, the process for putting them together is a little easier sometimes when it's just me. But I love having guests, so we'll do that too. Oh, I'm also thinking about we should do another YouTube show for election night this year. We did it in 2020, and it was awesome. It was super fun to be hanging out with friends and talking about transportation and urban policy, and that other, election stuff was going on in the background, other places, but we spent 8 hours online on YouTube chatting it out. And so Chrissy and Jerome Horn were here. Oh, we had a ton of guests, a ton of amazing guests that day. I couldn't actually believe we got so many great guests for that 8-hour show, but it happened. And if you want to go back and check that one out, it's on YouTube still, on the Overhead Wire YouTube channel. Maybe we can do another one this year. Maybe it can be even bigger extravaganza. I don't know. But anyways, I got big ideas, but we'll see if I have time for any of this stuff. But that's a long way off. Obviously, November is a long way off. Let's think about the 500th episode first in July. Well, before I get to the show, I want to let folks know that they can get this podcast and Talking Headways wherever you find your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Cast, and of course, Apple Podcasts. Thanks so much to subscribers for listening through podcatchers, especially if you're listening to me now. You're probably listening through a podcatcher. It's really great that you keep coming back to the show. We really do appreciate it. And if you're so inclined, leave us a review on iTunes. We've had lots of awesome reviews on there, and it's been a few years. And actually, that's how sometimes folks find me for advertising opportunities and stuff, is through our iTunes reviews and how positive they are. So I really appreciate that. That's actually, in the last couple of weeks, I've gotten some inquiries based on the reviews that we've gotten in the past. So thanks a lot for that. Also, you guys like to listen to the news, and we're already 12 minutes in to the episode or so. And so this is what you're here for. You're here for the news. You're here to hear what the biggest news in transportation and urban planning are, right? So here are the news items that were popular in the Overhead Wire Daily. Our daily newsletter started in 2006 over the last few weeks. Go to theoverheadwire.com. In the top right of the site, you can find out how to sign in and sign up if you want. Also, we're going to revamp our website soon. We're actually on the process of that. So that's going to be cool too when that comes up. We have so many irons in the fire. My brain's going to explode. But here's the news, okay? Making new spaces for skateboarding. Cities around the world are rethinking skateboard infrastructure as a way to make empty plazas and neglected spaces more vibrant and welcoming for people. Officials in New York, San Francisco, and Paris are building skating-friendly public spaces as the sport becomes more accepted thanks to the X Games and inclusion of skating at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. This was by Gary Moskowitz in Reasons to be Cheerful, which is an interesting publication, right? Reasons to be Cheerful. I like the premise of it. I know that there's been some people that push back on some of the articles they write because maybe they're not so cheerful, but this one is pretty cheerful. And also this kind of allows me to point back to the episode we did with Aaron Breitwar of Comet Skateboards and thinking about, this is specifically talking about trick skateboarding, and the difference between trick and riding for transportation can be huge. So I want to point that out too, because I know Aaron's an avid listener, and we did this great episode with him a few months ago. But this is interesting too, the idea of Jane Jacobs' Eyes on the Street, idea where, you can put people on the street. If you have a tough area in a city, you can actually, kind of reprogram that space. And if you can get folks to do trick skating in that space and have eyes on the street and people around, maybe it makes it more visible for other folks to go there, then that's great. And so, a lot of stuff's happening, and it's cool that, the trick skating has been getting, more attention through whether it's the X Games or the Olympics. And, it's always been kind of we talked about this on the show too, like it's always been kind of programmed as counterculture, but actually it's just kind of a method of people to hang out and get a group of friends together and just be, I think that's harder for young people as well as older people too, to just kind of go out and be without having to spend money. And so, if you have a skateboard and you can hang out, you can go to the skate park, hang with your friends, see the people you want to see every week. I think that's kind of an underrated thing about this idea generally. And I really appreciate this article for talking about, some of these places that are thinking about the revitalization of their space because of that kind of change that they've made in their thinking. Next up, morphing policies that allow segregation. The Louisiana Supreme Court recently opened the door for the creation of St. George, a city of 90,000 people who live in previously unincorporated areas near Baton Rouge. The ruling is a win for the Cityhood movement, which Pete Saunders, the article's author, describes as a practice where majority white areas draw new boundaries to exert more local control amid an influx of black residents. Saunders believes the creation of Cityhood, as seen as St. George, is just a new way to entrench segregation. This was by Pete Saunders in Cornerside Yard. We've seen this in this case in Baton Rouge specifically, but also in Atlanta too. There's a lot of discussion about like Peachtree, getting its own city and separating out from the city of Atlanta as a way to avoid not just the aspect of race and those types of things, but also financial, which is tied to race as well. But they think that escaping the city means they'll have to pay less taxes or something, and so that they want to try to figure out how to build their own place. And ultimately, that's not. I don't think it's in their best interest overall. I don't think it's in the region's best interest of any of these places that try to do this. Just we're thinking about, transit agencies specifically now in the Bay Area and the idea of combining them. You have all of these different cities and the jurisdictions, and you have jurisdictional boundaries, and they get really ridiculous in terms of, how you provide services to places that are really one economic unit. And so, this is just another part of that too, is the idea that they want to have control over who's in their neighborhoods, who's in their communities. And a lot of times it's really, has these huge racist undertones or overtones for that matter. And so it's frustrating, I think, to see this new way to figure out how to segregate people. That's not exclusionary zoning. It's a new thing. It's making your own city. Okay, next up, competing intercity rail ideas. Legacy intercity rail operator Amtrak and up-and-comer Brightline are competing for a chance to operate rail in between major cities in Ohio. However, state officials are reticent to build and operate a passenger rail system, which is required for Amtrak to provide service and funding. Brightline, unlike Amtrak, can finance, build, and operate its rail lines, and may also lobby elected officials to build support. This was by Ken Prendergast in the NEOtrans blog. I think we're going to try to get Ken on the show, and so we'll talk about this a little bit more when he comes on, but I think that's interesting. The idea of that Amtrak and Brightline are competing against each other, and the limits of a public entity versus a private entity in terms of what you can do in terms of lobbying or in terms of advocating and things like that, and whether that's better for an outcome that comes from wanting people that want intercity rail in one way or another. Next up, how do I find my third place? Third places, gathering spots of friends and acquaintances that aren't home or work, were made famous by a 1989 book, The Great Good Place, written by Ray Oldenburg. Third places were disappearing even before the pandemic, but an epidemic of loneliness is highlighting their importance now more than ever. As cities change and people gather in new ways, reimagining what third places could be essential to our collective well-being. This was by Ali Volpe and Vox, I should say. Yeah, this kind of goes back to the comments I was making about the skateboarding thing, right? So there's a lack of places where people can go and see their friends or hang out without having to spend money. And in the article, they talk about a woman who in New York City was having a hard time in New York City the first time she lived there, moved away, and then came back to try to give it another chance. And then so she set up her own like kind of mixing space where she could invite people to hang out, and people had a place to hang out. People had a place to go and see friends, new friends, old friends, acquaintances, those type of things. And so, we always talk about kids and how they need spaces to go. And sometimes those third places for them can be online as well. We have these communities like Twitch and forums and things like that where people go and to hang out and see their friends. And I think that that's another type of third place. But we need to cultivate these types of things to avoid this loneliness epidemic that we're seeing around the country and the world. But third places, it's a thing, and it's frustrating, I think, for folks when they see their places disappear because of displacement, gentrification. Maybe the business just wasn't working out. Maybe there's other issues that are at play. But something interesting to think about is what a third place actually is, because we do talk about home and we do talk about work a lot, but we don't necessarily talk about these third places maybe as much as we should. Next up, second best traffic safety efforts. Much needed traffic safety efforts are often frustrated by governments that are structurally biased against change. To make progress for safer streets, Gregory Schill, a professor at the University of Iowa College of Law, suggests that sidestepping big political obstacles to implement second-best changes can save lives by focusing on easy wins and low-hanging fruit. He highlights the installation of bollards and better streetlights as examples of easy-to-implement infrastructure. This was by Gregory Schill in Bloomberg CityLab. We've had Greg on the show a number of times and really enjoyed his work thinking about laws and traffic laws and how they're biased towards automobility and autocentricity. And here he makes some good points. There's a lot of stuff that we want to change, street design, the design of suburbs, that type of stuff, but that's a long-term project. And we shouldn't wait around for those to happen to make street safety efforts real. And whether that's, little things that, streetlights and those types of things that are easy, cherry picking wins, that's great. But we also need to focus on, I also think we need to focus on those big wins too. But, if we can start off by taking the little things, that's great and would work as well. I think a lot of times there's some pessimism from folks about whether that's actually possible to make sure we redesign streets or rethink the public realm of transportation infrastructure. And it's hard in states with preemption like Texas and Florida are starting to get there too, where they're actually banning complete streets and they're banning these safety changes in states that have really high traffic collision and traffic death rates. But making those small changes is something we can do right now. And so let's do both, right? Let's do both. Mapping tools could inform where you choose to live. Close, an interactive travel time map created by Nat Henry, allows users to visualize the proximity of walkable destinations that matter to them. By using a time to furthest important destination approach, Close may better reflect the walkability of an area compared to other measures like walk score. This was by Diana Lind in New Urban Order. Yeah, this is a cool idea. And I think this is kind of similar to something that Jarrett Walker is going to talk about on our show, which is the isochrone maps and thinking about where you can get. Accessibility is a new kind of discussion. It's not new, obviously, but it's a different way to think about transportation policy. There's mobility, there's accessibility, but the accessibility movement and the discussions about it have only grown larger in the last, decade or so. And this is another way to map that out and show people where the destinations might be that they want to go and how hard it is to get there, whether it's by transit, bike, walk, whatever it might be, but it changes the way that people think about where they are in space. Ancient ways of cooling streets. Researchers in Seville, Spain are taking cues from a millennia-old Persian system of underground aqueducts called qanats to cool city spaces through a project called Kartuha Qanat. By feeding water underground, the system cools areas above ground by several degrees in the hottest months of the summer through a series of vents. Smaller scale versions of the project are already in use, creating bioclimactic bus stops to cool riders as they wait for the bus. This was by Jesse Chase Lubitz in Al Jazeera. Super interesting, in those hot areas of Persia and in Iran, they have these things called qanats, and they basically run water underground like an underwater piping system. So it's like an aqueduct, but it's underground because they don't want the evaporation. And so taking that idea to the next level, this is really cool. And I thought this was a really cool article talking about that, what they're doing in Seville. The puzzle of climate change and housing. After the Great Recession, the Feds cracked down on high-risk mortgages that led to the collapse of the housing market. Today, mortgages are more regulated on the buyer's end, but many are still risky due to new and future impacts of climate change that aren't part of the calculation of mortgage risk. As interest rates rise because of the risk, it might be time for regulators to stop allowing banks to extend mortgages in areas that are likely to be impacted by the negative effects of climate change in the future. This is by Susan Crawford in Moving Day. Susan's been on the show a couple times too, and her last book, Charleston, really got me, thinking about this climate change and especially sea level rise movement. But this insurance thing is something I really, really want to talk about. I want to learn more, obviously, about it. But Susan's article is really interesting in that it thinks about the financial crisis and how, housing got crashed then. And so they made that stronger from a consumer perspective, but they didn't really focus in on climate change, which is something that continues to be allowed to impact housing in a way that's negative in the future, because, all these places that are allowed to have mortgages, all these places that are allowed to have flood insurance, all these places that, basically it's hard for people to move out and protect their assets. It's going to be tough in the future to protect them from the sea level rise, from climate change, from extreme weather events like rainfall and extreme heat. And so it's going to be something that we have to reckon with, and something that the federal government is going to make a lot of people angry if it changes some policies, but it's also going to help save some people along the way. So these things are fighting against each other, and Susan really makes a great case for, those why those areas should be regulated and changed, and what we can do to avoid another catastrophe like the 2009 financial crisis. Next up, LA to Las Vegas high-speed rail construction begins. On Monday, April 22nd, construction began on Brightline West, a high-speed rail that will connect the outskirts of Los Angeles, California and Las Vegas, Nevada. Once completed, trains on the line will reach speeds of 200 miles per hour. The CEO of Brightline hopes to open the line to service by 2028 for the Los Angeles Olympics. That's cool. Yeah. So build it. I've seen a lot of people is like, why can we do this one and get it going so fast? And California high-speed rail isn't there yet. And well, California high-speed rail is already under construction before this line. Also, this line has been in the process since like 2005. So it's not like it just popped out of nowhere, which I think a lot of people miss, and a lot of the articles miss as well, because this is something that's been going on a long time. They've been planning it a long time. It just changed operators, changed owners basically, and they put in the bid, and here it goes. So I'm sure it'll get done, completed before the Olympics, and they have an easier path because it's through the desert. But I'm sure California high-speed rail will do some good moving too before then, hopefully. Interesting that that's going to happen. Interesting to see how many people take it. And finally, in the main segment here, the pitfalls of moving away from big cities. A new paper from Enrico Moretti at UC Berkeley followed workers whose jobs had been lost between 2010 and 2017 and found that those who stayed in large labor markets were able to get another job much faster than those who didn't. Workers in smaller markets often took a year or longer to find similar work. And over the last year, after the big work from home boom, the importance of labor market size looms over many decisions to leave them. This was by Aki Ito in Business Insider. Yeah, so basically agglomeration effects are still in effect, right? That's basically what this is saying. And it can be harder to get a job if you're outside of a labor market that has a lot of the jobs that you're looking for. So if obviously there's a lot of tech jobs in Austin, but they're not going to be as specialized as, say, the Bay Area. So if you have a specific type of job in Austin, there's going to be less of that job in Austin than there will be in the Bay Area because of the way the markets work and how many people are doing those jobs and where the agglomeration effects happened and where they built up over time. And so I think that probably reigns true for any specific industry. You can't just rearrange economic markets and job markets and things like that overnight, although the pandemic really tried. But it's an interesting reminder that some of this work from home stuff is really good for folks who already have jobs and who are, maybe really good at their job and are compensated well, and they can actually move away and have made that decision. But it's also maybe hard for them if they lose that job and make it so that, they might not be able to find a new one really quickly. So it's a really interesting study, and I hope they do more on this topic. Okay, so now we're in the bonus items. Here's a few items that I thought were interesting from the newsletter, things that I took out of the newsletter that I had written about in the intro sections of the premium version. Obviously, I don't include all of them, but because, I don't have time really, but there's more where this came from, I should say, in terms of the newsletter. And we do 3 of these items every day, as well as kind of some commentary 3 days a week for the newsletter. And so I always like to go back and share some of these with folks because I think they're really interesting. First off, California will set in motion a plan to use half of existing lands in the state's 100 million acres as carbon sinks in order to address climate change. The first of its kind plan will manage wildfire risk, protect water supplies, and promote carbon storage. This was in the Los Angeles Times. A new study from the AAA Foundation, the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety, found that increased speed limits on interstates spill over speed-related collisions to local roads near the interstate as drivers are slow to adjust to new surroundings and street designs allow for greater speeds. This was in Streetsblog USA. Without a lot of natural resources to mine, Taiwan is taking urban mining, stripping out metals and materials from demolished buildings and smartphones for recycling to a new level. Some of the companies that created this process are finding 80% of raw materials are reused. This was in Time magazine. That's really great. I've always been wondering kind of how many metals and how much is in the landfills. We've thrown over the last 20 years or so, I'm sure there's been a lot of 10 years at least. Phone batteries and stuff and things that get tossed out that can be reused, and electronics and stuff like that. It would be amazing to see what actually we could do if we urban mined like that, going into landfills and figure out what metals we have and what we can extract from those, tossed away places. Los Angeles Superior Court judges ruled that California's recent laws regarding the ability to split lots and build more housing across the state is unconstitutional. Legal experts suggest the interpretation was very narrow and will likely be overturned, but the fight over housing policy continues through the courts in California. This is in the Los Angeles Times. Cities around the country are passing ballot measures to provide more childcare for residents as the pandemic opened eyes to the shortage. New Orleans recently passed funding for 1,000 childcare spots for $21 million, and Texas made it possible for cities to exempt qualified childcare providers from property taxes, which allows parents to invest in themselves. This was in the Associated Press. Yeah, this is great. Yeah, I wish there was more discussion about this, about, basically teachers as well as childcare providers. I mean, there's a lot of places that have teacher shortages, or it's hard to get them housing, right? So it would be really good if cities could figure out, how to fund those better and make sure that they get them the value that they are, need. Do childcare, to do teaching, to do all those things that our care infrastructure is necessary. Colorado's governor announced a compromise between environmental advocates and the oil and gas industry that would avoid a messy ballot measure in the upcoming November election. The result is new rules that cut smog-forming compounds and more money for transit operations throughout the state. This is in Colorado Public Radio. Yeah, so basically they found some transit money under some oil company, couch cushions, and they have been able to fund RTD and some other transit agencies around the state. Now, they haven't really figured out the governance issue because they wanted to reform RTD in a different way in terms of the board. So they've been fighting over that, but that probably will come in a future time when they figure that out, I guess, the state legislators. But for now, it's all just the funding side that's been worked out, but not necessarily the legislative or the governing side. But maybe they'll do that. Or maybe RTD will say the same. I'm not super familiar with the local politics of that, but it's something that they've been talking about locally. The city of Cincinnati has completed its 100 megawatt solar array, the largest of its kind in the United States. The solar array will power city buildings and will be available for some residents as well. The project is part of an effort by the city to have a carbon neutrality by 2050. This was in WVXU. And then finally, a new study from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver found that e-bike rebates led to a 30 to 40% drop in driving. E-bike buyers in Saanich, BC were offered between $350 and $1,500 in a pilot program between 2021 and 2022. 60% of those buyers were new to cycling. That's an incredible change and a positive result for active transportation. Really great news out of British Columbia. And then finally here, there's an interesting paper about growth in big cities comparing Houston and California, or actually Texas and California, and housing and construction and prices. And so I wanted to kind of talk about this commentary I wrote in the newsletter at the beginning of one of the newsletters, because I think it's really interesting research. But basically what the researchers found is that housing construction costs are much cheaper as cities continue to sprawl, as California did up until the 1990s, and in Texas, as Texas continues to do now. But once that is constrained either by distance to jobs or amenities or build out, construction of infill makes up for more of the units constructed in these places. But that infill construction also means more expensive units on a per unit basis. The story the paper authors seem to be telling is that Texas and California aren't really that different. It's rather Texas is finally catching up to the constraints that California already had reached, regardless of the regulatory environment. That's an important point they make, is that they're different regulatory environments, of course, but California and Texas are along the same trajectory, and California just reached its constraints earlier, and Texas is going to get there soon, as they're seeing in places like Austin. Another interesting finding they had was that areas tend to ossify. So these suburban areas tend to ossify. Before, land tended to transition from rural to suburban to more urban densities over time as people built more housing and buildings for what they needed in a close proximity. But now they've become fixed and don't transition. So people don't like change, and it's harder to change the suburban structure of things. So the places don't change that much. So as my commentary goes, what this current housing crisis seems to be highlighting for me is that cities around the country are starting to come to the limits of available land for cheaper housing, and thus expanding supply is becoming harder. What this also tells me that our transportation policies, such as building and expanding more highways to accommodate the demand for sprawl, have even more diminishing returns than they did the first time around. So we did release an MPAC podcast, with Tracy Haddon-Lowe that I mentioned at the top of the show, discussing her work that Brookings has done on mapping activity centers and regions, not just downtowns, and what the pandemic has done to transit ridership. And she noted the areas where work from home and transit ridership pre-pandemic are the highest were the places that had longer commutes for workers getting into employment and activity centers, which kind of points to this sprawling city cheap housing theory here. We also released a Talking Headways episode, obviously, with Megan Kimball this last week, discussing her book, City Limits, on highway fighters in Texas. And TxDOT is spending tens of billions of dollars on highways in Austin and Houston to serve this symbiotic, sprawling development pattern that's dying out because of constraints discussed in the paper. And in Dallas, they're fighting to change the calculus on transportation investment to create urban infill that could double down on housing and transportation system that will slowly grind regional growth to a halt, rather than double down on a housing and transportation system that will slowly grind regional growth to a halt. So these two discussions specifically, in particular, highlight that our transportation investments need to change in order to start seeing more returns. This may be why starting to see more interest in high-speed rail, as faster connections will change the transportation access calculations once again. Interestingly enough, South Korea sees 6 high-speed rail lines as part of a national birth rate plan to get people to go home and see their families at the end of the day faster from the center of the city. And the land available, a drivable distance from amenities and cheap housing is gone now. And infill is getting more expensive, and it will continue to get more expensive in places like Houston and in Dallas and in Texas, just like it has in California. So, I think that opens up the door for, more transportation options, better ideas around 15-minute cities and things like that. And the question is whether we'll recognize that's what's happening and change it. Obviously, right now, we're not seeing it because we continue to have this housing problem in California and other places around the country, and everywhere else is going to catch up. Everywhere else is going to catch up in terms of how expensive stuff is because we run out of land, and the cities are growing at a rate that the single family developments can't keep people close enough to the amenities in the cities that they need jobs at to go, basically. And it's the same kind of discussion we were having earlier about the agglomeration economies too, right? There's an agglomeration of people being close together for jobs, and that isn't really changing, as Tracy mentioned in her part discussion of the show. So anyways, I thought this study was interesting. I hope folks can go check it out. I'll have it in the show notes. It was a paper in real estate economics by Anthony Orlando and Christian Redfern in the May 6, 2024 publication date. So if you are listening to the show and you want us to look it up, go for it, but it's also be in the show notes as well. Okay. Whew, that's a lot. That's a lot to cover, right? So this week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without it, so thank you very much. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. At $2 a month, we'll get you some stickers and a handwritten note. $10 a month, we'll get you one of our transportation scarves. We'll send it your way. Also, I want to mention that we did produce an audiobook version of Raven Unwin's 1909 classic, Town Planning and Practice, if you want to get your hands on one. All this stuff is on theoverheadwire.com or in the show notes. Check it out if you get a chance. Also, the show notes will include all the links to the articles that we've posted, as we mentioned, the research paper that from Houston, etc. So go check that out if you get a chance. Listener questions and comments. If you have a comment or a question, feel free to tweet us or comment on the social sites where the podcast appears. Feel free to email us at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. Thanks to everybody who's been writing in with guest suggestions and comments about previous episodes over on LinkedIn or through email or on social media. It's much appreciated. The stuff that we've gotten hasn't necessarily been something that I'm going to read out on the air, but I do appreciate everybody sending stuff in. Also, if you have any questions specifically for me or Tracy or Chrissy, shoot them over at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. I usually try to get back to folks as fast as possible. And don't worry about me not having a ton of time, because I'm more than happy to write folks that take the time to write me. So feel free to do that whenever you get a chance. Puppies and Butterflies is the part of the show we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe just didn't fit in the other sections. We just finished watching some Somebody Feed Phil episodes, and we also finished up The Bad Batch on Disney Plus. Looking forward to The Acolyte and more Star Wars coming up, as well as Ahsoka Season 2. Looking forward to the next Mandalorian and Mandalorian Grogu movie. Those type of things, they'll come. We'll watch. I'm just a Star Wars nut, so that's kind of how it is. But we also want to watch, home improvement shows and food shows and stuff that's fun like that. So hopefully there'll be some new comedies coming out. Ghosts ended too on CBS. We like Ghosts too, but that one ended for the season. The writer's strike really kind of cut a lot of these seasons in half. Sadly, though, the May 4th show didn't quite work out this year. Maybe we'll do another Star Wars show. I don't know. I'll have Jeff Munowich come on, hopefully, at some point and do some more, maybe some other guests, too. We're talking about it. We're talking about some ideas about things we want to do. Maybe another thing I thought of is, do you all want to do, or do you want to have us do, extra Patreon episodes with bonus Monday shows episodes that's like movie commentaries? Maybe we could do movie commentaries on city oriented episodes. It could be Star Wars, it could be anything really. We thought always that singles would be a fun movie to cover, because the whole premise of the movie is this transportation planner that wants to build a commuter rail line between Seattle and Tacoma. And so that might be fun. Just kind of like some commentary tracks on some of these city-oriented movies might be fun. Just throwing some ideas out there. If y'all have any ideas of stuff you might want to see or might want to hear, let me know. I also have been trying to post older episodes again, and if there's any request to let a certain episode come on first, let me know. We'd love to share what folks feel might be buried deep in the archive, so let me know if that's of interest too. So lots of ideas, lots of things to think about. Okay, well, you can find me on Twitter at The Overhead Wire or at theoverheadwire.com. You can find me on Mastodon at theoverheadwire.sfba.social, on Instagram and Threads at The Overhead Wire, or LinkedIn. You can find me there too. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn. I love that folks are connecting on LinkedIn, as it feels like a more professional social network than maybe some of the other ones. I'm still on Twitter, of course. There's a lot of people there fighting the good fight, so I appreciate that too. So yeah. Thanks for joining us at Mondays at The Overhead Wire. Thanks to our generous Patreons for sponsoring this week's podcast. We look forward to seeing and hearing Chrissy and Tracy come back soon. Chrissy should be here after Memorial Day, and we'll see you next time.
Talking